to hear from you today. This is part two of our Blossoming Our Bhakti series. Today's topic is choosing our association. Last week we heard from His Holiness Giriraj Swami on the importance of japa, and today we will hear about the importance of association. So over to you, Mother Urmila. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. So it's May 24th, 2020, and this is from Austin, Texas over Zoom. So I think it's very significant that last week Giriraj Swami talked about japa, and this week we're looking at association, because those are two of the angas of bhakti that are particularly noted, those two that are particularly noted for being the key to advancement in devotional service. I mean, in one sense, Rupa Goswami tells us, Srila Prabhupada tells us, that any of the angas of bhakti that we engage in can bring us to perfection. Any of them. You smell the incense offered to the deities, you follow the Rath Yatra cart, you can achieve perfection. Any of them, even for a moment. At the same time, if we look very carefully, Rupa Goswami does talk about three most important items, all of which have to do with guru, which is of course related to association, accepting a guru, taking instruction, taking initiation. Then Rupa Goswami gives the five most powerful items of devotion. And this is chanting the holy name, reading the Shastra, especially the Bhagavatam, living in a holy place, worshiping the deity, and associating with devotees. And then we could even say of those five most potent items, we usually talk about either the chanting of the holy name or the association of devotees as being the most crucial. And it's very difficult to say of those two, because we say, Harinama, 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 Eva Kevalam, Kalam, there's nothing except the chanting of the holy name. However, without the association of devotees, how would we know the holy name? How would we know to chant it? And it doesn't quite work the other way. It's not that by chanting the name, you're going to know about the devotees. It's more by association with devotees, we know about the name. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Sadhu Sangha, Sarva Shastra Koi, Lava Matra, Sadhu Sangha, Sarva Siddhi Hoya. That by 1/11th of association with a great soul, that with the sadhu, we can achieve Sarva Siddhi Hoya, all perfection, everything we could want by the association of devotees. It's such a famous verse also in the Bhagavatam, Satam Prasango Mama Virya Samvaro Bhavanti Vikarna Rasayanam Kata Tachosana Jat Varga Bhartmani Shradharvatir Bhakti Anu Kramishati. So that by associating Satam Prasango, so Satam, the truthful devotees, the sadhus, Prasanga, not just Sangha, but Prasanga, really deep, sweet Sangha, association with the devotees. One will go through all the stages of bhakti. One could analyze all the stages of bhakti as an increasing association with devotees. And that's the reason, the primary reason why Srila Prabhupada established the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. He states in the Nectar of Instruction, in the 4th verse, that that's the purpose of his ISKCON society, and that's what nourishes his ISKCON society, is the association with devotees. So we're going to ask why. I always like to ask why. Why does it work? I'm just, the way my mind works is when I'm told this is true, I always want to know, why is it true? How does it work? What's the mechanism? What makes it true? So we're going to look at that, the power of association, and then the problems with non-devotee association. We're going to look at the special benefits we get from association with devotees. We're going to examine how we can associate with devotees. What's the means? How do we do it? What does it mean? And then we're going to look about how do we associate with people who are not devotees, at least not at this moment in time. We're not going to be able to go in depth into any of these because each of these topics could be a week of seminars in and of themselves, but we will at least go through them. So the power of association. So why does it matter who we associate with? What's the principle in general, putting aside specifically devotee association? Why does it matter who we associate with? How does other people's company affect us? And let's think for a moment of different categories of people that we associate with. So most of us have some connection with a family. Most people have some very close friends. We may have more general friends. Maybe we have a job, business, so we have people, work colleagues or employees, employers. Maybe we go to school, we might have our teachers, the other students. And then there's people we interact with maybe in a shop, at the post office or something like that, people we interact with. And there's sort of a continuum of intimacy. So some people we're really close to, we really reveal our heart to, and other people we just go to the cashier and we say, have a good day, how are you doing? But we don't even know their name or remember their name. But for all of these people, from our closest associate, family member, intimate friend, to the person we pass by when we're walking down the street, we're affected by the people we associate with. And you think, why? Well, first of all, we try to please them. So just a little earlier today, I took my great-grandson to the temple room. The temple's right next door, and it's open for the people staying on the property. And there's stairs leading to Prabhupada's Vyasasana, and he went up the stairs and he took the flowers that had been offered on the rectangular molding of Prabhupada's feet, and he took them off there and he put them right on the Murti of Prabhupada's feet, and he was looking at me and I was smiling. And then he got down from the stairs and he starts moving the stairs away from the Vyasasana, and I shook my head no, and he stopped. So he kept checking with me with what he was doing. Was I pleased? Some things I was pleased with, some things I was not pleased with. And he tended to keep doing things that pleased me and not do things that displeased me. So this is what we do generally with people. We try to please them and they try to please us, right? So I also tried to please him. He wanted to have the cushions out in a certain way. And so I wanted to do things that make him happy. He wanted to do things that made me happy. And I was trying not to displease him. He was trying not to displease me. Then we also try to impress other people. We don't want to look foolish. We want people to think well of us. We want people to think that we're smart, that we're competent, that we're attractive, that we're well-intentioned, well-motivated, that we're trustworthy, and so forth. We don't want to appear to be an incompetent or foolish or irresponsible person. And we want a sense of belonging. We want to fit in with other people. We want to be part of a group. I remember a class I went to many, many years ago where Hridayananda Maharaj was speaking about Narada Muni in his previous life as a Gandharva and how he was a very well-liked Gandharva. And he mentioned this, that we all have a desire to be liked. We have a desire to fit in. So these are all ways in which association affects us. We mold ourselves in our appearance externally, our external behavior, but even in our internal ideals and our internal character in order to please and be pleased by others, in order to fit in with others, in order to impress others. And we can understand this very strong tendency in us, both from a spiritual perspective and from a biological perspective. From a spiritual perspective, we're part of Krishna, and we belong to the society of Krishna in the spiritual world. We have an eternal home and eternal associates, and that principle operates in the spiritual world. So it's part of our spiritual nature not to be alone and to have association with others and try to please them and be pleased by them and fit in with them. And then we also have a biological imperative in terms of our physiology, psychology, our brain, how our brain and body are wired. Humans are social animals like cows or deer or horses or bees. We're not solitary. Human beings are not solitary creatures like, say, a shrew or a tiger. And as social beings, our very survival, it's not literally dependent. We can survive on our own if we have to, but we are very dependent on our group for our physical survival. And because of our dependence on our group for our physical survival, then naturally we want to be accepted in a group. We want people to like us, we want to like them. We want to feel comfortable. We want to feel we belong. To some extent, we want to have some status in that group. We want to have some respect in that group because then we're more likely to be taken care of. So this is a biological imperative that, of course, is the mirror of the spiritual, like described in the Bhagavad Gita, the upside down banyan tree. So because of both the urge of the soul and because of the way that our human body and brain and mind is designed, we have a very strong tendency to want to please others, to have them please us, to impress them, and to belong, to fit in, to have some respect, some appreciation, and so forth. And so our association affects us a tremendous amount. And of course, on the other hand, we have a very subtle impact in terms of karna guna sangasya, that the modes of nature are also affecting us. And that's a whole discussion in and of itself. What are the modes of nature, sattva, rajas, and tamas, and how they affect everything. They affect everything. There's so much research, psychological, sociological research, that shows that it's not that we perceive things with our senses. This is how we were taught in school that things work. I perceive things with my senses, then I use my logic to analyze them, and then I form my sets of hypotheses and beliefs that that's the scientific method. But the evidence shows that our minds don't work like that at all. That the way our minds work is that we form a set of beliefs for whatever reason that we got from our parents, or our friends, or today from the internet, whatever, a book we read. And according to those beliefs, we then perceive things in our environment through the filter of our beliefs. And that's one of the reasons why 10 people, 20 people, 200 people, 2,000 people can all experience more or less the same event. They can be at the same place at the same time, witnessing and experiencing the same thing, and everybody's story about it will be different. And this fact is a problem when trying to find out who committed a crime, because even eyewitnesses will have different accounts of what happened and who did what, and so forth and so on. It's quite a problem. There's many, many innocent people who are convicted on the basis of wrong eyewitness testimony because people's perception is clouded by their biases. And it's one of the main problems that keeps coming up in America, where police officers will assume that a person of color is more likely to be a criminal. And so they will assess that person's behavior in a way that they wouldn't assess a white person's behavior who did exactly the same thing. So the person of color reaches in their pocket to get their wallet and then they get shot, whereas the white person reaches in their pocket to get their wallet and they don't get shot. Why? Because there's a bias. Oh, he was reaching for his gun. Yes. So the modes of material nature are what gives us our different biases as to what's good, what's bad, what's happening, what things mean, what things don't mean. And again, this is a very deep topic, but we take on different modes of nature according to what we eat, when we go to bed, when we wake up, how we give in charity, and the people around us, what we watch, what we hear, who we're friends with. We will be affected by their particular combination of the modes, and that will affect everything about us. It will affect our political leanings, it will affect our scientific understandings, it will affect how we view the behavior and actions of others, everything. And it will affect to what extent, of course, we can understand God. We were just reading in the Bhagavatam a couple of days ago. It was text 46, I believe, in the 16th chapter of the 10th canto, where the Nagapatnis were saying to Krishna that the modes of nature cover you, and yet they also reveal your presence. And the speaker, Ratnaradika, was making the point that an atheist and a theist can look at nature and one says, oh, there's evidence for the fact that God doesn't exist. And another person looks at the same nature and says, oh, that's evidence that God exists. Yes. Again, we see this in our ordinary life. Two people can look at the same person and say, with doing the same thing, and one of them can say, oh, that's evidence that this is a bad person, and another person would say, this very same thing is evidence that this is a good person. I mean, think of something really up in the news today, like, Bill Gates has dedicated himself to a large extent, at least externally, I don't know what his heart is, to wiping out diseases and developing vaccines. And this area of his altruism and philanthropy is seen by some as demoniac and others as beneficent. So the very same behavior on his part, the very same inclination is either demonized or glorified, depending on the person's mood. And such can be said for anything. I mean, we have Hitler as the epitome of the demon in modern history, but in his day, he had many people who glorified him and thought that he was going to create a wonderful world. So how one sees things depends upon one's modes of nature, and one's modes of nature is very affected by who we associate with. So our ability to understand God, our ability to understand spirituality is very affected by our association. Now, there's a much deeper reason why specifically devotee association is crucial, but we'll get to that in a moment. In Nectar Devotion, chapter 12, there's this statement: association is very important. It acts just like a crystal stone, which will reflect anything which is put before it. Similarly, if we associate with the flower-like devotees of the Lord, and if our hearts are crystal clear, then certainly the same action will be there. What's interesting is this quote is a statement given by Hiranyakashipu, and yet Rupa Goswami is quoting it as a truism. All right, let's look specifically at the problems with associating with people who are not devotees. Now, there's many ways we can define devotees. We'll get to that when we talk about how we associate with devotees and how we associate with people in general. So we're not going to define right now what we mean by devotees and what we mean by non-devotees. However you want to understand those terms right now is fine, because there's so many gradations of devotees and non-devotees, and we'll get to that in a moment. But in general, people who are not devoted to the Lord, who are not devotees, association with them creates doubts, because a non-devotee sees their life, they see the world as separate from God. They either think that there's no God, or that God is mostly irrelevant, or maybe God is one piece of the pie of their life. Here's the part of my life that has to do with God. There's the part of my life where I work. This is the part of my life for my family. This is the part of my life for my entertainment. And, God is off to the side. So such people doubt the existence of God, and they will get us to doubt. They will encourage us to doubt, because if we try to express how Krishna is working in our life, they'll denigrate it. Oh, even if they don't say anything, they'll just, their look, their body language will let us know, oh, I'm not supposed to say that. We'll become hesitant to speak about the place of Krishna in our life and how we see Krishna's hand working in our life. We may be hesitant to see the hand of Krishna working in the world due to such people's mentality. Such people will also give us a taste for materialistic and bodily pleasures. And I found this happen to me when I was in college. I had decided that I wanted to join the Hare Krishna movement during a break in January and February, where in the college I attended, Bennington in Vermont, every January, February, you had to get some kind of work, paid or volunteer, as part of your studies. And during that time, I ended up staying in the temple ashram in Evanston, in Chicago, unbeknownst to my parents. Hare Krishna. Anyway, at that time, I decided that I wanted to quit everything and just move into the temple, but I was only 17 at the time. So I thought, well, I have to wait till I'm 18 and so forth. So I thought, okay, I have to wait till I'm of legal age. So I went back to college to finish that semester of college. And when I went back, I was wearing tilak, I was wearing saris, sort of kind of saris. I mean, there weren't any Indian stores in the United States in those days. The devotees generally didn't wear anything that was designed to be a sari, but we wore pieces of fabric. And I was wearing tulsi beads. I was reading Prabhupada's books. I was doing a little bit of chanting. And during that time, I turned 18, right before the end of the semester. So there were these girls who lived in the same dormitory. They were nice girls. They were good girls. They were Christian girls. They weren't involved with drugs or alcohol or illicit life. They were nice girls. So I kind of trusted them. And they said, you know, now that you're going to be 18, you have to see an R-rated movie. So this is, you know, movie only that adults can see. Not like pornography, but, you know, a movie that's not considered suitable for children. And I said, well, I'm not going to the movies. I want to practice Krishna consciousness. But they kept pressuring me. And finally I thought, well, you know, what kind of a movie are they going to take me to? It's not going to be so bad. So I went with them to this movie, and it was terrible. It was all full of violence, and it was awful. And that experience made me realize I really needed to be with the devotees. That when you're with non-devotees, they may subtly or grossly pressure you into doing things which are bad for your spiritual life. Associating with non-devotees may encourage offenses, because many times non-devotees are very critical of the devotees. They're very critical of religion, of spirituality, of the devotees. And so we may end up becoming offenses. And they may induce us to do things that we don't even believe in. Like I was saying with going to that movie, I mean, that wasn't something that I would ever have done on my own. So when we're with non-devotees, there are things that we don't even want to do, that aren't our ideals, that aren't our principles. And because there's this tendency to want to please and be pleased and want to belong and want to impress others, we may end up doing things that we're like, why am I doing this? Now, there are special benefits to associating with devotees that are beyond just the fact that we are going to tend to pick up on their qualities and their way of looking at the world, just like we would do associating with anybody. You know, that's a general principle of association, that I'm going to have a tendency to pick up on the behavior, the ideals, the mindset, and so forth of the people that I'm close to. And that's a good thing with devotees, because they're going to see that Krishna is everywhere and that everything's related to him. They're going to be pleased if we do things and related to him, and displeased if we don't do things and related to him. That's there. But there's some special items that really make devotee association so crucial and so wonderful for our spiritual life. that the first one, I mean, there's many, but looking at a few, that Krishna is pleased when his devotees pleased. This is a very simple to understand idea that when I went to the temple today with my great grandson, so at one point, he's just 2. At one point, I had him get up on the donation box. He's looking at the altar and he sees these little peacocks, like jeweled peacocks on the altar. And he wanted a peacock. His name is Abhimanyu. And he said, Abhimanyu peacock, Abhimanyu peacock. And I said, that's Krishna's peacock. Anyway, one of the main pujaris was there. And she said, oh, do you want a peacock? And he said, yes, Abhimanyu peacock, Abhimanyu peacock. So he went in the back room and found a little jewel peacock that they don't use much anymore on the altar. And she gave that to him. And I was so happy that she made him happy. So her pleasing him pleased me. Right? If she had given me that peacock, I would have said, I don't need this peacock. What am I going to do with this peacock? But it would have given me some pleasure, but I would have been happy to have gotten the deity's remnants, but I also would have been somewhat annoyed, like, okay, now what am I going to do with this? Whereas by her pleasing my family member, who was dear to me, she automatically pleased me. So Krishna is also like that a little bit of service for a devotee, even not knowing the person's a devotee, just, opening the door for a devotee or helping them with something or whatever. Krishna is very pleased. Oh, you've helped my devotee. So it's like the fast track to Krishna's satisfaction. And without Krishna's satisfaction, we will not have a relationship with him. That's it, full stop. We just won't. Again, this is true even in our ordinary relationships. People are not going to have a relationship with us if they don't want to. So there's this example of parents and children. I had a similar experience when I was going to graduate school, that one of my professors, when I was in the master's program, one of my professors wanted me to simultaneously be in the doctoral program. Generally, you finish your master's degree and then you get your PhD. And he wanted me to do it as a parallel track, which was rather intense and not something I would recommend that people do. Anyway, that's what he wanted me to do. And I said, how do I apply for that? And he said, well, just write a letter. I'll bring it up in the faculty meeting. Now, this professor was the dean of the School of Education. He was actually an interim dean. So by the next year, they had a permanent person. But he was running the whole School of Education. So because he was running the School of Education, the other members of the faculty committee said, well, if you want to do this, we'll agree. And because he was the dean of the School of Education, the university accepted it. So the whole dean of the university, 29,000 students, they accepted that. So I was saying, well, that's how it works. If you please Guru, you please Krishna. If you please the devotees, you please Krishna. That somehow I pleased this professor. I was in some of his classes, and he was impressed with my work. So he may give this invitation to me, and because he gave this invitation to me, although it was very unusual, the university honored it. The university respected it. So that's how Krishna works. Even if we're not qualified, on many levels, I wasn't qualified to go into the doctoral program. I didn't yet have my master's degree. I only had my undergraduate degree. And even though I wasn't technically qualified, it's like that. Even if we're not really qualified, if the devotee recommends us to Krishna, then Krishna will say, okay, if you recommend this person. Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur in the Madhurya Kanambani explains that Krishna is neutral. And Krishna is not going to give bhakti himself. He just stays back and is awarding the various material desires of the conditioned souls. So how does anyone get bhakti? Well, what happens is a devotee doesn't have to be neutral like that. A devotee can go out in the street, just like we saw in the beginning, all the boxes of Prabhupada's books to distribute. So a devotee can go out in the street and give out books to people. And if the devotee shows mercy to somebody, Krishna will say, okay, I'll show mercy to this person. So Krishna's mercy follows the mercy of the devotee. You could say that the mercy of a devotee, it's like digging a trench from a river to a plant. And then the water from the river flows into the trench and goes to the plant. Whereas normally the river is on its own course. So this special feature of the mercy of the devotee is why it is essential to associate with devotees. I mean, it's essential. And without the association of devotees, our possibility for attaining Krishna consciousness, for attaining spiritual enlightenment and perfection is almost zero. I mean, we can get a mercy directly from Krishna, but generally not. Generally not. All right, now that we have at least some conviction, I hope, that association with devotees is important, we may ask, well, how do we do it? What does it mean to associate with devotees? So generally, the way that devotee association is described is that we should associate differently depending on our level of bhakti in relationship to the level of bhakti of the other. Now, this concept, while extremely important, poses some very serious problems. How do I determine my level, and how do I determine someone else's level? One difficulty is that very few of us are firmly on one level all the time. You know, we may be at one level in one thing and another level in another thing. You know, we may be very, very, very advanced in honoring prasadam as the mercy of the Lord, and not very advanced in seeing Krishna in his holy name. And it can be conversely also. You know, we can be very realized in worshiping the deity and not so devoted to the Shastra, or we can be very devoted to the Shastra and not very interested in worshiping the deity. I mean, there's all different levels. And you know, at any one point in time, it's not so easy to ascertain our whole level. So keeping that in mind, it's sort of a holistic, general assessment. Another thing is, you know, it's really hard to judge ourselves. It's really hard to judge ourselves. We are expert at self-deception. Some of us are way too hard on ourselves. We have this inner critic that's always telling us how bad we are and how foolish, etc. And we may just always feel that we're far, 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 far more fallen and terrible than we actually are. We may be beating ourselves up inside all the time. And we may also be deceiving ourselves about how great we are. And I think we may be thinking that we're far more clever. You know, we have a major American politician at the present time who's often says that he's the best at things that, you know, that he has no experience with. And that's very common among conditioned souls, you know, to think that I'm the best at something and I'm really good at something. It was just a few weeks ago that I met a devotee who was telling me, oh, well, I'm doing this service. I'm not qualified, but because I have so much devotion, they're letting me do it. And I thought, oh, okay, that's interesting. So we tend to do those two things. And some of us are more the beating ourselves up kind of people, where we're always saying how terrible we are. And some of us are more the praising ourselves people, where internally we're always thinking how great we are. And most of us kind of vacillate between those. So sometimes we think, wow, I'm really great devotee. I have so much taste. I have so much ecstasy. I love Krishna. I love Prabhupada. I'm so devoted. I haven't had any problem with material desires for a long time, to, oh my goodness, I'm so fallen. Why did I do that? Why did I say that? That's so terrible. And most of us tend to kind of vacillate between these. And neither perspective, of course, is right. And both perspectives are right. As a pure soul, we are glorious. And as a conditioned soul, we're pretty awful. But the problem is that assessing our level of Krishna consciousness is difficult because we tend to have distorted ways that we view ourselves. We tend not to really see ourselves very honestly. And we also tend not to see others very honestly. We tend to inflate the level of advancement of people depending on our relationship with them, and we may deflate the level of people's advancement depending on our relationship with them. So, if somebody did something that upset our friend, then we may think that person is not a devotee, they're just a terrible person. And if somebody did something nice to our friend, we may think they're a wonderful devotee. So we also have this problem with assessing others' position. So we're going to look at several different definitions of how to gauge ourselves and others, because it's key to how our acharyas and the Shastra discuss association, keeping those caveats in mind that we're holistic beings who can't always be categorized, and that we tend to deceive ourselves about our own position and about the position of others. So one definition from the Nectar of Instruction is pretty objective. There's a definition by initiation. So the beginner is chanting the holy name, maybe has what we in ISKCON call first or Harinam initiation. The intermediate devotee has Diksha, what we in ISKCON call second initiation or Brahminical initiation, and is worshiping the deity. So they have second initiation and they're worshiping the deity. Those are pretty objective. Do you have first initiation? Do you have second initiation and are worshiping the deity? Okay. The third is a little bit harder to discern, undeviating devotional service. So they never not do devotional service, and free from the propensity to criticize others. So this means not only are they not criticizing others, but they don't want to criticize others. They don't have any inner push to criticize others. We can tell whether or not people speak critically, but whether or not they have an inner push to criticize others is a little bit harder to discern. Okay, so those are pretty objective, at least for the beginning and intermediate level. And somebody may say, well, isn't that all external? Isn't that all external? But, look, taking Diksha should involve some material detachment. And it means they've accepted some austerity, as Prabhupada discusses in the purport to text 5 in Nectar Devotion. Some, they've accepted the 4 related principles: no meat eating, no illicit sex, no intoxication, no gambling, some idea of control of the body and the mind. They've inquired with relevant and useful questions. So we have there's some, it is possible, of course, just to take initiation externally as a formality, and it not be indicative of any kind of advancement or realization. But it's pretty safe to say that in most cases, we can understand things that way. So that's one way we can understand what platform we're on, and we use that way of understanding in the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Whether one's initiated or second initiated, when they got initiated, how long they've been practicing. Are they a god brother, god sister? Are they a god brother, god sister of my guru? Those are all, in one sense, external things. But on the other hand, they do indicate to some extent one's sincerity of purpose. There's not an absolute correlation. Okay, then we also can define by how we deal with others, especially devotees, right? How we deal with others. So this is one of the main definitions of the stages of devotees. It's given in the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam and is quoted all over the place. That someone who has love for God, who makes friends with the devotees, who avoids the envious, and who is kind to the innocent. So we can see how does someone deal with others? How do I deal with others? That's the middle devotee, and the beginning devotee is someone who worships God, but they don't know how to deal with others nicely. They criticize anyone who has a different opinion from theirs. If someone's from a different sangha, then they criticize them. What to speak of if they're from a different religion. So they're very much, my way, my opinion is the only way. There's no other way. Yes, I worship God. And of course, in an extreme form, these people will kill those of other religious faiths or other religious sects of their own faith. So this is the beginning level, and then the advanced level, according to this definition, is someone who sees God everywhere. So this understanding is a little bit harder to discern in ourselves and others, because I'm probably not going to identify myself as a fanatic who doesn't know how to respect others, right? As if that's my position, I probably won't be able to discern that. But it's just something that is to some extent observable and measurable. Then Prabhupada gives a definition in the Nectar of Instruction, at least the main printing from BBT on pages 50 to 51 and the bottom of page 57, that we can understand by one's strictness in sadhana and one's dedication to preaching, to what extent one is doing that. And that is to a large extent observable. We can define by an attachment to chanting. And that's, again, there's some subjectivity there. Somebody may be chanting their 16 rounds every day for, 30, 40 years, but they may be doing it as a ritual or mechanically or so forth. So that's not always so easy. I've been told this story, I don't know the source, many times how Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati saw someone at Radhakund chanting 150 rounds a day. And the devotee said, well, that person's very advanced. And he said, no, they're just a beginner. So there's some subjectivity there, but at the same time, there's some objective measure. If a person says, I don't like chanting, I struggle to chant 1 round a day, they chant while they're watching the movies, you can see their attachment to chanting is not very, very great. And if they like to sing about Krishna, if they like to talk about Krishna, they like to chant their rounds, then there's more attachment to chanting. We can also define the levels by degree of faith in the Shastra. And this definition is given in the Nectar Devotion as levels of people qualified to begin Vaidhi Bhakti. So the person least qualified to begin Vaidhi Bhakti means you're following the scriptures, is someone who doesn't have much faith and knowledge of the scriptures. I mean, that's pretty self-evident that if I'm going to follow Bhakti based on what it says in the scriptures, I don't know what's in the scriptures, I don't believe what's in the scriptures, I'm not very qualified to follow the scriptures. The next level of qualification is someone who has very solid knowledge and faith in the scriptures, but they can't always convince others. Right? The beginner can be bewildered by others. The one in the middle is not going to be bewildered by others, but can't necessarily convince them. And then the highest level is someone who themselves has faith and knowledge of scriptures and who's able to provide scriptural knowledge to others to convince them. So that's at least by the whether or not a person can convince others or be convinced is something that can be measured. We might ask in the Nectar of Instruction text 5, why the criteria of having no propensity to criticize has been the only quality Rupa Goswami mentions for the advanced devotee, other than undeviating devotion itself. And certainly criticism is very much rooted in envy. And envy is our whole problem. So to whatever extent that envy's gone is indicative of our level of advancement. There's other ways we can also look at our level of advancement through Shraddha to Prema, which we don't have time to discuss today, but there we have, instead of just 3 levels of beginning, intermediate, and advanced, we have a lot of levels. There's beginning faith, association with devotees and taking initiation, giving up on unwanted things. We'll be talking about that tonight at, I think it's 6. I can check. 5:30 Eastern time from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. We'll be talking about getting rid of anarthas. So getting rid of unwanted things, being fixed in bhakti, getting a taste for bhakti, getting attached to Krishna, and then real awakening of ecstasy and love, and where we're situated there. So once we've discerned as much as we can, our own level and the level of others, and I don't know how to emphasize this enough, this is without self-righteousness. Self-righteousness means when I try to make myself righteous in my own eyes. And in being self-righteous, I then judge others according to my standards. Now, we have to judge, this is a really tricky thing. We have to judge ourselves and others in order to choose how to associate with them. We have to. We're given that prescription by the Lord, by our acharyas. At the same time, we don't want to be what's called now judgmental, where we put ourselves in the position of God, we put ourselves in the position of Yamaraj, and we decide, who's good and who's bad, and to what extent I'm good and what extent I'm bad. I mean, in one sense, the safest position is always think that I'm a beginner and always think that everybody's better than me. Yet we have to discriminate. So to kind of hold those two things side by side. I'm a beginner. I'm whatever bad qualities I see in anyone else, I have those in some other form perhaps, but I have them. I'm probably worse than everybody else. Everybody's higher and greater than me. And all right, well, I've already taken second initiation, worshiped the deities for so many decades. I'm chanting all the time. I'm preaching Krishna consciousness. So I can kind of understand where I am in the continuum. And I'm looking at this person. This is someone who's had contact with bhakti for 1 week and they haven't made any commitment, or here's somebody who's far more realized and enthusiastic than I am. So that also has to be there. Both of these at the same time. Both of these at the same time. Otherwise, we will criticize others. We don't want to use this discrimination, in a good sense, discriminating, as an excuse for having a propensity to criticize others. So then what do we do when there's somebody who's superior to us in bhakti? And going back to what I said earlier, we're holistic. So maybe there's somebody that's far more advanced than me in realizing the glories of the holy name, but I may be higher than them in cleanliness standards. So I'm not going to ask that person about cleanliness, but I might ask them about chanting, because we're not all at one level in the same thing. So that's also very important. I might ask someone who's more expert than me and more realized than me in deity worship, but I might not ask that same person about something from the Shastra. I might be more knowledgeable in the Shastra than that person. So there's some fluidity sometimes about, this understanding who to associate with. So those who are higher than me, I serve them, I inquire. Those who are equal to me, I am their friend. We exchange confidential talks and so forth. And those who are lower than me, I assist them. I help them, I show them compassion, I give them guidance, and so forth. I help them to succeed. And this principle, it should also be applied to people who are not devotees. So this is the instruction of Narada Muni to Dhruva. It's kind of an incredible instruction in 4.834. It says, everyone should act like this. When you meet someone more qualified, you should be very pleased. When you meet someone less qualified, one should be compassionate. When you meet someone equal, should make friendship. And Narada says, in this way, one is never affected by the threefold miseries of this material world. And I find that astonishing. If I don't want to be affected by the miseries of this world, who doesn't want to be affected by the miseries of this world? Me. It's all dependent on how I treat people. Now, from Prabhupada's purport, he says, generally, when we find someone more qualified than ourselves, we become envious. When we find someone less qualified, we deride them. When we find someone equal, we become very proud. These are the causes of all material tribulations. The great sage Narada therefore advised that a devotee should act perfectly. Instead of being envious of a more qualified man, one should be jolly to receive him. Instead of being oppressive to a less qualified man, one should be compassionate toward him just to raise him to the proper standard. And when one meets an equal, instead of being proud of one's own activities before him, he should treat him as a friend. These important functions will make one happy within this material world. We are not opposed to being happy within the material world, but we want to be happy within the material world in a way that pleases Krishna. So when someone's higher than us, our material tendency is to become jealous and to say, oh, Bhaktisanta gives this example. That person couldn't be a high court judge. I knew him when we were kids, and, there's no way. No, I saw him sitting on the bench. Oh, well, they must not be paying him. So our tendency when we see somebody more advanced is to find fault in them. Yeah, well, that's an advanced devotee, but you should have seen him the other day, what he was talking about, what he was doing. And I don't know if he's so advanced. And when somebody's lower than us, we tend to exploit them. This is the general tendency in the world. Someone's lower than me, let me exploit them, right? And when someone's equal, then I brag about myself. I'll try to put myself forward. I try to make myself higher than them. So to be joyful at someone else's accomplishments and qualifications that are above our own. Wow, you're more spiritually advanced than I am. You know more than I do about this. You have more experience than I have about this. This is wonderful. I'm so happy for your accomplishments. And if someone's equal, we can be friends, again, sharing. And if someone's lower, to make them higher. Srila Prabhupada told Yamuna, my god sister Yamuna, if you don't teach people how to cook, then you'll become envious. And I pondered this. If I know more about something than somebody else, and I don't raise them, or at least try to raise them to be as good as me, then I want to have more than they have. And that's what envy is about. Envy is about, well, you can have money as long as it's less than me, and you can have an attractive spouse as long as they're not as attractive as my spouse. You can be smart as long as you're not as smart as me. So that I want to keep you down. I'm not going to tell you my secret recipe, because then you'll be as good of a cook as I am. But we should want people to be better cooks than we are, better parents than we are, better everything than we are. This is the getting rid of this envy in the heart. All right, so we talked quite a lot about the importance of association in general, why we're so affected by the people with whom we associate with. In a general way, we talked about the modes of material nature. And we talked about non-devotee association, what the problems are with that, what's the special benefits of devotee association. And we talked about how we understand gradations of devotees. So we were giving some definition to what do we mean by devotees, and how we understand ourselves and others, and then how we associate accordingly. And if we get this right, even for an 11th of a second, we can get all perfection. So we have some time. We have about 25 minutes. If anybody has any questions.
Hi, Krishna Urmila. There's some questions in the chat window.
Okay, I can see one of them. How do we make sure to not be influenced and affected by non-devotees in our daily lives? Well, with non-devotees, if that non-devotee is more expert than you in something, then be joyful for that. And appreciate their expertise, and maybe even ask them about their expertise, and be able to gain from their expertise that you can use in Krishna service in the ways in which they're not as realized as you. Certainly if they're a non-devotee, they're not as realized in devotion. Then have compassion. Take the mood of compassion and of caring. That's the main way to do that. How can we always make sure to take association of devotees instead? Well, we can take association of devotees throughout our day, even when we're working out in the world. if we're meditating on the devotees, if we're meditating on the songs and the prayers of the devotees, the activities of the devotees, if our working is to please the devotees and to please Krishna, then even though externally, ostensibly, we're working with non-devotees, we're not really. The order of importance for the 5, I don't know. Chanting, association, reading and studying, worshiping deity, and living in a holy place. With these 5, the 2 that are really emphasized are chanting the holy name and association of devotees. I haven't seen a ranking, but those are the 2 that are, of those 5, that we find most emphasized all over the scriptures and by everyone, all the devotees. At the same time, Rupa Goswami says any of those 5 can arouse ecstasy even in a neophyte. Okay, how can we apply some of today's class principles in dealing with kids? I'm going to be giving a class on dealing with kids. When am I going to be giving that class? I'm going to be giving that class on the 27th at 7 in the morning Eastern time. So if you're in Texas, that'll be 6 in the morning. To people in India, I don't have the link up yet. They haven't given me the link yet. But we're going to look at parenting according to the Gita. Then I also have some classes on YouTube, parenting according to the Gita and 4 keys. Briefly, what we'll say is that our children may be far more advanced than us in bhakti. In fact, that's not at all unusual. It's just not at all unusual. I was just having some dealings with my daughter today and thinking how far more advanced in bhakti she is than I am. So it's quite common that our children may be more advanced than us in bhakti. That's not at all uncommon. But if they're young children, then they're not going to be as advanced as us in knowing how to eat neatly, or knowing how to use the bathroom, or how to brush their teeth, or knowing algebra. So again, we have, levels. So there may be times that I'm compassionate to them and instruct them. There's other areas in which I may serve them. And then there's ways in which I may be their friends. So that depends on what we're talking about. That what area of our lives, and to see that they're individuals, and there's going to be areas where we need to guide them, areas where they can guide us, and areas where we can be friends. How does one determine if an offense has been made? What a passive sentence. Isn't that part of judging others, which is also recommended to be avoided in devotional service? Well, I'm not sure. How does one determine if an offense has been made? The English of that is difficult because there's no subject. If an offense has been made. So are we trying to determine if I offended others? Are we trying to determine if others offended me? Are we trying to determine if person A offended person B? Isn't that part of judging others, which is also recommended to be avoided in devotional service? That depends. So I have met people, both devotees and non-devotees, whose general habit is criticism and fault finding of others. It's their hobby, you could say. For some of them, perhaps it's their full-time job. But I have definitely met people where that's what they do. They're criticizing and fault finding others. Best to avoid such people. If they're practicing Krishna consciousness, respect them from a distance. When we start getting into a specific offense at a specific time to a specific person, we're really running into a problem there with our biases. Because, if person A does something to my best friend that my best friend doesn't like and I don't like, I'm much more likely to label it as an offense than if person A does or says the same thing to someone I don't know or someone I don't care about. So it's a little tricky. And again, I've seen practically that one person's offense is another person's service. I know I've seen this. So if we have, person A does something or says something, person B may say, oh, that's an offense. And person C says, no, that's a wonderful service. It can be so subjective. Now, if it's physical, it's not subjective. So if somebody is punching the devotees and hitting them and kicking them and beating them up, that's pretty clear that that's offensive. Some offenses are indisputable and non-negotiable and objective. But other things, it's difficult. It's difficult. If it depends on our relationship. If it's unclear, if we have the right relationship, we might ask the person. I'll do this. If I hear person A criticizing person B and it makes me feel uncomfortable, I'll say that. I'll say that really makes me feel uncomfortable. Would you please not talk about person B like that? Or, the other day in an email, someone was writing to a group of people and somebody wrote, why haven't these people done such and such? Why are they stubbornly refusing to give the information? And I wrote back and I said, we don't need the word stubbornly in there. That's a judgment of them. We don't know how they're feeling. You can say that they've refused to give the information as a fact. That's just a fact. So, we can say something, and if a person if they have that as a habit, best to avoid them. But we can avoid them without condemning them. It's the mood of condemning people and always thinking I'm better or always condemning myself that really gets us into trouble. I can just say, well, this person's just what they're going through, and I go through my stuff, and I have problems, and may they be happy. Next one, that's a deep thing. We could talk about that for a few hours. Should we look to associate primarily with like-minded devotees? Yeah, that's what our acharyas tell us. And that is eternal. In the spiritual world, there's groups of devotees, there's groups of gopis, groups of cowboys, groups of cows. Sometimes they associate with people who are not like-minded, but generally they associate with people who are like-minded. Srila Prabhupada wrote to Yamuna and Dinatarni, he said, if 2 people are compatible, that's enough association. And if 200 are incompatible, then nobody will make any advancement. Okay, next, going back to your Bill Gates example, there are devotees on both sides. Some accept the current pandemic at face value. Others espouse what would be considered conspiracy theories. How do we develop faith in Krishna Nam and Krishna Katha when recited by devotees who have a different viewpoint, even on material things like the origin of COVID-19? Those 2 things are not really related to each other. We're all individuals, and as individuals, we're even going to have different viewpoints about Krishna and our relationship with Krishna. And there are going to be devotees on every end of the spectrum on any question in this world. There really are. It doesn't matter what particular situation is going in the world. One interesting example, my mother was born in Jerusalem and was always an avid Zionist. She was always fighting for Zionist causes. My parents donated a tremendous amount of money, quite literally millions of dollars, to the Israeli government, to, my oldest sister married an Israeli, lived her whole life there. So when I joined ISKCON, there was a devotee who joined around the same time, whose father was a leader in the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And she and I were best friends, we're still friends. And we used to joke how that outside of Krishna consciousness, we would have been enemies. Now, I still tend to have more of a Zionist than a Palestinian viewpoint because of the way I was raised. And she still has more of a Palestinian than a Zionist viewpoint because of the way she was raised. And it's just, I don't talk about it with her. I talk about Krishna. It just kind of is what it is. Or we have my god sister, Lekha Shravanti, whose father was Walter Reuther. Walter Reuther was the leader of labor unions particularly fighting against the policies of the Ford Motor Company. And Ambarish is the great-grandson of Henry Ford, who, of course, started the Ford Motor Company. Both of them were in Detroit, which is the home of Ford Motors. They're both disciples of Srila Prabhupada, and they both gave money to buy the main temple in Detroit, the Fisher Mansion. So it was big headlines that Walter Reuther's daughter and Henry Ford's great-grandson would combine to buy the Fisher Mansion. Now, I know Lekha Shravanti, or at least I knew her many years ago. I haven't talked to her for decades. But she definitely had the bent of her family toward the needs and the view of labor. And I haven't talked to Ambarish about these things, but I wouldn't be surprised if he had more of a bent toward the needs of management and the viewpoint of business management. But there are still devotees, and they're working together in Prabhupada's service. And when it's not to be expected that, we're all going to agree on all of these things. That's not a reasonable expectation. And it doesn't change how we feel about Krishna. I have very good friends in Krishna consciousness whose views differ from mine on certain political issues. And some issues, they're much more liberal than I am. And, we just kind of agree to disagree and say, we're not going to talk about those things. And some people have views that are far more conservative than mine. I remember I was talking to one of my godbrothers, GBC, sannyasi guru, and he wanted to talk about a particular topic. And I said, I don't want to talk to you about that topic. We disagree. We're not going to agree. And there's no point in having the discussion. But we could talk about other things. We could talk about Krishna Nam, as you're saying here. We could talk about the Shastra. Next one, how do we reconcile the following two? Not having the propensity to criticize anybody and our propensity to criticize some other organizations as Mayavadi. Oh, excellent question. Generally, such criticisms of various philosophies and organizations are done by preachers. It's not that we should go around having a critical mentality, but it's necessary for the preachers to be able to say that certain things are spiritually harmful and certain things are spiritually beneficial. They need to do that. Otherwise they can't be preachers, they can't be teachers. As far as people who are not speaking like this in terms of preachers, again, it's a question of knowing with whom and how to associate. So if somebody is preaching Mayavada is actually an offensive philosophy, and impersonalism is not offensive. But if somebody is offending Krishna, then we want to avoid them. We don't want to become infected with their offenses unless we're able to help them. As far as the organizations, then if we're not a strong enough preacher, again, we avoid. It's a practical thing. At the same time, we're very happy that they're looking for spirituality. I mean, that's good. It's good that they are looking for something other than the mundane, and we can appreciate that. We can also recognize that many people who took up Krishna consciousness were originally adhering to some philosophy that had some aspect of impersonal or even Mayavada leanings. Okay, how do we go about practicing the third Shikshastakam? Wonderful question, somewhat related to this class. I'm still working on that. I think maybe you should ask somebody else. I feel like every day I try and fail to practice the third verse of the Shikshastakam, which Bhaktivinoda says in Bhajana Rahasya is the doorway to being fixed in bhakti. It's extremely difficult to not care about how much others respect us and to always be respecting others and to be very tolerant of others' mistreatment of us. It's extremely difficult, one of the hardest things. And those behaviors are some of the prime indicators that we're firmly entrenched in the false ego, that I become so offended by others' mistreatment of me, by others not giving me what I need or taking away what I have, that not showing me respect, not showing me consideration. And I don't respect anybody. I'm not considerate of anybody. I mean, those are the prime indicators of false ego. How can we get free of them is probably another class. Another question, what is one thing you can say that is attributed to your exemplary practice of bhakti for all these years? Oh my goodness. Well, I don't know if I could say that I have an exemplary practice of bhakti. I mean, Rupa Goswami says that he's never done any devotional service. Right? Let's see if I can find that verse quickly. Rupa Goswami's verse, pretty heavy duty, what he says about himself. Okay. He says, I am certainly the abode of many offenses and am completely devoid of any devotional practice. I don't have any other shelter, therefore I regard you as my ultimate goal. There is no one as sinful and offensive as I am. How can I describe myself? I even feel ashamed to give up my sins. So Rupa Goswami says he's devoid of any devotional practice. So I think considering that I don't think I could characterize myself as being exemplary in any practice of bhakti whatsoever. If you're going to ask just a very practical, objective question, that how is it that from the time I was initiated until now, that I've continued in my practice of sadhana, my vows to Srila Prabhupada. Is there any particular limb of bhakti? Yeah, there's a number of things in bhakti that I really like. I really, really like taking care of my deities. It's something that I find very joyful. I like singing certain verses and prayers, singing them in Sanskrit and English. I love to teach Krishna consciousness, which is why I'm teaching this class. I love to put together, I just put together a couple new PowerPoints. Those don't have any music, but I like doing very creative things with teaching, where I'm using visuals and music and ideas. And I love studying the Shastra. I mean, I really love studying the Shastra. I could probably read the Shastra 10, 12 hours a day without any problem. And, you know, especially if I'm analyzing the Shastra, looking at different Shastra and how do they fit together. I mean, right before this class, I'm looking at preparing for a class I'm going to give tomorrow morning, and there's purports on that verse. It's in the 10th canto. We don't have Prabhupada's, we have, of course, Krishna book, but we have purports from Sanatana Goswami, Jiva Goswami, Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur, and Madhvacharya. So, you know, I love looking at those and how do they fit together and what are they saying about this thing and the other thing. So those are probably some. And I love talking about Krishna. I love you know, chanting and talking about Krishna. Krishna's anything about Krishna, sharing Krishna with like-minded devotees is something that I've always really enjoyed. I don't know, so many things. I really like being at some holy places, but I'm not a pilgrimage person. I don't like going on, you know, okay, like spiritual tourism. That I don't enjoy. So I've tried that, you know, going with big groups and, you know, we're going to go to 10 holy places today and hear all about the holy, that I don't like at all. But I like going to holy places with a few people, having kirtans there and reading about the place. I love spending time at Govardhan Hill. That's something that I really, really enjoy. So I don't know, a lot of things that I like in bhakti. Okay. Okay, we just have a few more minutes. My Prabhu, who is not active in devotion, has a question. He asked why great souls like Jesus Christ and Buddha reform others and did not reform people who came to kill them. Why did they let that happen? Why did they not reform people who came to kill them? Those persons, like all religious teachers, they reciprocate with people's interest. And they're fearless. They know that they're not the body. They know that they can't die. They know that nobody can harm them. And so they don't have this self-preservation instinct that we have biologically. It's just absent in them. I mean, they have a sense that they should maintain the body as God's property, but they don't have a self-preservation instinct for the body. They know that they're eternal. So they have no particular reason. To them, death is not a very important thing. It's like, as Krishna said, changing your clothes. They don't perceive death as some kind of calamity. And they're only going to teach people who are receptive. If someone's going to kill them, that person's probably not very receptive. How do I control my anger? That is really, again, another topic than we talked about today. So we'll look just super briefly. The best ways of controlling anger is understanding what anger is, being able to understand it properly. Like Prabhupada says, we see the naked form of material desires. So if one sees anger for what it is, that anger is often just the name we put onto a biochemical reaction that the body puts out when the automatic parts of the brain, the amygdala, have ascertained that we might be under threat. And that's true for a social threat. We're social beings. So if someone says or does something that we perceive as an insult or as a threat to a relationship that we depend on, the amygdala translates that behavior as if we were seeing a roaring lion and floods our body with stress chemicals. Our mind then often interprets that as anger. We often call that anger. It's the energy given by God that if we're under threat, we can fight or run away or freeze. And again, we often call that anger. So that happens very fast. Bhagavatam says it falls out of the sky. It happens in an instant. It has to, because if we're going to be running away from a lion, then we have to do that without really thinking about it. It's not something that we need to do some higher order thinking skills. The other causes of anger are, as Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita. So that first cause really comes from an interpretation of the mind of a particular physiological state. That's designed for our protection from threat, both physical and social. And another anger is from attachment, contemplating the objects of the senses, that we become attached, we become lusty, then we become angry when either we don't get what we lust after, we get it and it disappoints us, or we get it, it thrills us and we lose it. So again, it's seeing what it is. It's a response to material attachment and material lust, and being able to take a step back from that and saying, I'm an eternal servant of Krishna, that this really doesn't have anything to do with my eternal identity. It has to do either with my attachment to external things, or it has to do with my interpretation of a particular biochemical state. And in either case, that feeling, if I don't act on it, and if I neither act on it or repress it, can dissipate very quickly. That's really a technique of the Gyanis and to some extent the yogis, although it's in the Bhagavad Gita, it's in the Bhagavatam. In addition, I can turn my thoughts to Krishna. I can let the mental and physiological aspects of anger rise and peak and fall. And while that's happening, then I can take myself to something with Krishna and Krishna's devotees. To do that, you have to know the Shastra. You really do have to know the Shastra. But I can think of whatever is so-called making me angry at the moment, there's going to be something in the Shastra that is an equivalent. I mean, just recently in the last month or so, I received a very insulting and disturbing email from someone who I thought was a very good friend. And definitely a reaction I had to that would be something one would call anger. And then I went to some other devotee for some advice, and that devotee just said, but oh, well, too bad. I'm not going to help you. And then again, because it felt like I was under threat. So again, I had this response, this physiological response that one could call anger. And then I just started thinking about, I let that happen. It was what it was. It had to the chemicals are put out in the body. That's an automatic system, like a sprinkler system or a smoke alarm. If you're making chapatis, the smoke alarm goes off. And then I was thinking about, Draupadi was insulted and nobody said anything. So I started meditating on Draupadi and how she cried out to Krishna, nobody's defending me, you defend me. And then I was happy. Then the natural physiological process that Krishna has designed for my protection came and went, and I was able to focus on something else. Okay, it is time to end. So I know there's another question here, but instead of addressing it, and now there's another question, instead of addressing it, I hope you will excuse me. I am going to take prasadam, and I have a meeting today, and then I have another class this evening. So this is very enlivening, and I'm glad everybody has such wonderful things to say, but I think at this point it's time to end. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Thank you so much, Mother Urmila, for that absolutely wonderful class. Just the whole questions that are coming are indicative that we would love to have you come back here and